Police officers, what was your they could have gotten away with it if they had just kept their mouths shut moment? Pull over this guy for expired tabs. Ask for his ID and is feeling around for his wallet. Can't find it. He says, "Aw, man, I'm one of you. It's cool." "Oh, what department?" "Oh, actually, I'm a security guard, but same thing." I'm polite. "So, where's your ID?" "Oh, it's in the," and he motions to the trunk. "It's in the trunk?" "Actually, no. My BS radar is going off." "Okay, want to get your ID out of the trunk?" "Nah, I don't have it." He starts looking around for another store to use, but now I know I'm supposed to stay out of the trunk. He's not giving me any more information. "No ID? Then I have to take you in and get you fingerprinted." I'm going to get into that trunk one way or another. He's looking like he's lost. I asked him what's in the trunk, but he's not talking anymore. We pull him out and get him in cuffs. Another officer takes him to get ID through fingerprints. Since his car's tags have expired the past 6 months, California, we tow the car. In the process of getting ready to tow the car, we need to take a quick inventory. In the trunk was a police uniform with fake patches and a metal badge. No gun, but a duty belt. He also has stacks of CP. This is a guy who a neighboring city had been looking for months. His MO was to dress as a police officer. Talk to kids and you can figure out the rest. If he gave me just his name, I could have looked up his ID and verified he had one. I'd probably have let him go, but the neighboring city had zero information as to his name. They only had a vague description of the car and the fact he was posing as a police officer. In fact, what he would do was start talking to kids, tell him he has to be taken in for questioning, handcuff, and take him to his car. He was a bad dude. Yep, there's a special place in hell for people like this. Can't wait to hear what happens to him in prison. Story 2. I had a car pass me once. Passenger hangs the upper half of his body out of the passenger side window with his middle finger in the air while screaming, "F the police." He had my attention for the seatbelt violation. I got behind the car and ran the registration. Registration is suspended. The registered owner's driver's license is attached to the registration, and his license is suspended. Registered owner also has 2 warrants for retail theft. I stopped the car and they both started with a free speech thing and how I can't stop them for giving me the finger or swearing, which is 100% correct. When I pointed out that I can, however, stop them for the passenger not wearing a seatbelt and for the registration violation, suddenly they got quiet. Driver got arrested for suspended license and his warrants, and the passenger got himself a citation. The driver's vehicle got impounded. Moral of the story, tell your passengers to shut their mouths. Had that guy not been a moron, his buddy would have been homeward bound. Another story, so this happened a few years ago. I was patrolling with my buddy at night. It was almost the end of our shift. Suddenly, we got an alert that a local nearby gas station had just been robbed, unsuccessfully, and that the suspect was supposed to pass by us in a red car. Indeed, seconds later, we saw a man speeding through the road. Details on the side, we ended up catching him on a dead-end street. When my buddy was handcuffing the suspect, I asked the suspect if he had something to do with the robbery. He repeatedly said, "I've never been there. Ask the ginger lady." Turns out the cashier that night was an old lady named Marcy covering for her ill daughter, who would have never been able to identify him since he was wearing a black mask during the robbery, which we never found. And Marcy had ginger hair. Fortunately, the suspect was kind enough to inadvertently confess to the crime. How could he know the appearance of the cashier if he had never been at the crime scene? The jury thought the same. Story 3. Not a cop, but a witness. During college, my friends and I would hang outside and smoke hookah. Frequently, we would invite strangers who passed by to join, or campus police would casually chat with us as they made their rounds. So one time, a group of freshmen walked past and asked to join. After about 15 minutes, the campus police car rolls up and the freshman gets visibly nervous. We tell them to calm down, the cops are chill. As soon as a cop gets out of the car, one freshman bolts and makes it about 20 feet before the cop tackles him. We all clap and heckle the kid. Upon searching him, the cop finds a bunch of grass. Then he says, "You realize prior to running, I had no reason to be suspicious. I just wanted to talk to my friends over there," and points at us. The cop ends up writing a ticket and sends him off. Story 4. I'm a police officer in the UK. It was about 2 a.m., which meant street lights were off. As I was patrolling, I saw a vehicle drive with only his side lights on, spun around, pulled them over. I asked for his license, and it was provisional. His co-pilot was 20 and didn't have a license, and the vehicle didn't have L plates. This means he is driving otherwise than in accordance with his license and also driving with no insurance, because as if he did have any insurance, driving otherwise than in accordance normally invalidates it. So I got him in the back of my car to speak to him, started writing out a traffic ticket for no insurance. and was going to seize the car and let him off for driving otherwise in accordance. However, as I'm writing the ticket, he says to me, I shouldn't even be driving this car. My mate doesn't even know I took it. I just kind of pause. I'm sorry, what? Yeah, my mate lives just up the road and I was around his. He fell asleep, so I thought I'd just take the car and go for a ride. Right. I get another unit to go to the address, and the suspect's friend confirms he's not happy for him to be having the car, especially now that it's being seized. So now, instead of 6 points and a 200-pound fine and a pissed off friend, he gets nicked for TWOC, taking a vehicle without the owner's consent, driving otherwise than in accordance with his license, and for no insurance. He's been to court and received 6 points and just shy of 1,000 pounds in fines and costs, as well as a pissed off mate, and spent a night in a cell. A night? Just a night in a cell? The dude was lucky not to get slapped with Grand Theft Auto. Story 5. Defendant, not an officer. My buddy and I were drag racing through town late one night, quote-unquote drag racing in my used beater-up Buick, so speeds were low and nobody was in danger. Flashing lights behind us, my buddy gets pulled over and I get away clean. Later that night, we get a phone call. The officer asked my buddy, who's your friend? Because he didn't even get my plates, and my buddy, not great under pressure, responded by giving him my name, address, and phone number. Cue summons to traffic court for both buddy and I. It's the day of, we're at the courthouse, dressed in the closest thing to suits that two idiot high school boys have, surrounded by our parents and siblings in their Sunday best. My case was first. Buddy was subpoenaed to testify against me because he was the only witness that I was present. The trial starts, but the officer isn't there. Let me repeat that. There is no officer on the other side of the court. My buddy is the only witness that either of us were racing that night, and he gets up on the stand. Let me also remind you that he's not great under pressure. Judge, were you racing that night? Buddy, yes, sir, we were racing, drag racing specifically, sir. Judge, and your friend here was who you were racing against? Buddy, yes, sir, his name's W. Knight 8111, and we were drag racing together. Judge, are you sure about all that? Let me remind you that there's no plaintiff in court today, and you are the only witness, and what you say goes. If you say you two weren't racing, that's what I'll have to believe. So, again, are you sure that you and WK Knight 8111 were racing? Buddy, yes, sir. Drag racing, sir. That mother lover cost me like $500 and more than a few points on my license because he couldn't just keep his mouth shut. Story 6. So a friend of mine and some of his buddies went to the Padres game and got canned. I was in downtown San Diego with my future wife on a date at House of Blues, and they rolled up on us while we were eating on the outdoor patio. Holy shit, were they wasted. I told them to beat it, and we were nowhere near the level they were at, so they needed to take their crap show elsewhere. Fast forward to the next morning, and I get a call from my buddy asking us to bail him out. Being a good friend, I go down with my future wife, and we bail him out. So it turns out they went to the parking garage they were in and were drinking more beers out of the trunk of their car. A security guy was cruising the lot and told them they couldn't be drinking out in the open, and of course, my buddy and his friends started talking smack to the security guy that he has no authority, etc. Security tells them he can call the cops in to handle things, and they all keep nagging. So he calls the cops. They show up, and these guys are still drinking beers. Cop tells them they have to throw the beers out, and then they're good to go, and he'll take off. If they chose not to throw away the beers, then he will take them to jail for public intoxication. 3 of the 4 guys walk to the trash can and throw their beers away. My one buddy turns to the cop and yells, "Whoopity-doo," and takes a big swig of his beer. 2 seconds later, he's on the floor, cuffed, and off to jail he went. Dumbass is all I can say. Story 7. Not a cop. Watched this happen years ago. UK. Wish I was making this up, but swear I watched it happen and confirmed the details with mutual friends after the fact. A friend of mine, P, was really well off but lived in a town with a strong mining background. V, working class area, and his dad sent him to local high school. As such, some of his friends were lovely blokes but legally questionable, especially once on a night out with substances in them. I rocked up at the taxi rank one night to find one of them being arrested. Turns out there'd been a disagreement over whose taxi had turned up between Pete and a stranger. The stranger was going to let Pete have the taxi, but his girlfriend started pushing him towards Pete, so Pete had punched him, knocking him out in view of a patrol car. I got all this from Pete's friend Lee before Lee then went up to talk to the officer. The logic, such as it is, I'll explain at the end, but this is what I watched unfold in short. L, come on, mate, let him off. It was a misunderstanding. PC, afraid not, he's spending the night in the cells. L, well, in that case, can I come too? PC, what? No, don't be mental, go away. L, frickin' arrest me then. PC, very clever, do one. Lee walks 2 feet away and starts pissing against the side of the bank the taxi rank was adjacent to. L, now arrest me. PC, get out of here before you get nicked for real, mate. At this, Lee realized how close he was to getting what he wanted, so he went over to the recovering stranger and headbutted him. He was duly arrested. Turns out Pete was the only one with money left, and Lee couldn't fathom how he'd make it home, approximately 3 to 4 miles away, without any money, so he figured the cell's a better option. Story 8. Obligatory, not a cop, but my brother-in-law is one. He told a story of when he was fairly new. He was sort of partners and shadowing another officer as backup, but also for their training. They get a call about a guy acting weird, harassing an electrical transformer and yelling at people. Cops show up. Lead cop tells my brother-in-law to approach the guy and he'll be close in case of trouble. BIL walks up, says hi, asks what Twitter is doing, all friendly-like. User replied that he's just out for a walk. User R is visibly under the influence, twitchy, scratchy, bouncing around while standing there. BIL asks what user is doing by a transformer and asks if he knows that it's dangerous. User claims to have no idea what BIL is talking about. BIL follows up by asking if user happens to have taken any substances recently. User says no, not for a long time, long time. BIL asks if he's sure he hasn't done anything. User swears he hasn't, not in a long time, a long time, long time. This goes on for several minutes while my BIL tries to conversationally ask this dude if he is on it. He is continually met with the dude swearing that it has been a long time since he used. BIL is now stumped, so he steps back to converse with his senior officer, who recommends asking how long a long time is. BIL walks back, tells him he shouldn't mess with a transformer, and asks again if he's sure he isn't on anything right now. Again, user swears it has been a long time, long time. BIL pulls a Columbo and asks the user one more thing. What, when he says it has been a long time, does he mean by a long time? How long is a long time? User, about 15 minutes. Busted. Hey, when you're a user, 15 minutes is a long time, a long time. Story 9. I was working security at a bar during a blues festival in KW. 2 drunk guys on a Saturday afternoon stumbled up to the front gates and asked to come in. They were noticeably drunk but not belligerent, yet they were told they were not allowed into the bar to drink at that time and proceeded to become lawyers and try to talk their way in. After a few minutes of back and forth between us and them, they started to get angry because we would not allow them through the gates to drink more. Cue the fight. The taller of the 2 guys decided to try and run past his friend and us, security, into the bar. This didn't go well for him, as when we tried to move him back to the road, he started to become violent. He ran at me in a hurry and fists up. Another security guard and myself shut that down pretty quickly, and he proceeded to tumble backwards over his friend and may have had some blood running from his nose. After the little fight, the 2 guys picked themselves up and walked away. About 5 minutes later, they came back, cleaned up, and had told us they called the police and wanted to have us arrested for assault. We were okay with them calling the police, as we have a fairly good rep with them, as the beat cops were in and out of the bar regularly to check in on things. First and second police officers arrive, cruisers. They start talking with the guys in security, getting the details of what happened. Third and fourth officers, beat cops, arrive. They were there for moral support, LOL. Fifth and sixth officers showed up, bicycle cops, and saw their friends were here so they could all take a break and enjoy the scenery. First and second officers are talking with the guys and end up arresting one for being drunk in public. His friend again tries to become a lawyer and talk them out of the arrest. They give the guy the card and say no bailouts on Sundays. You can pick your buddy up on Monday. He seemed to be okay with this. Then the keep your mouth shut moment happened. Guy who wasn't arrested, "This is democracy gone to hell," and proceeds to backhand slap the officer across the chest. Now picture this. 4 officers bend into a huddle and laugh hysterically. The other 2 grab the guy, toss his face into the car window, cuff him, and proceed to arrest him and toss him on top of his buddy already in the car. All officers disperse. We got back to work. The end. Story 10. It was my second or so week on the job, and the call came in about a man in a house covered in red at like 3 a.m. We all booked it there and found the door to the house wide open and everything was just quiet besides someone crying softly somewhere inside. We start clearing the house and immediately run into the owner of the house who is wheelchair bound and says it's her son upstairs who was hurt. We get up the stairs and it's bad. Guy who was like early 20s just lying prone on the ground with a girl on top of him, hugging him and crying. As we peel her off him, she starts to cry even louder and is hysterical, saying he's dying and that we have to save him. She had been applying so much pressure with her body that when she got off him, he started to really bleed out. My field coach sends me back to the car to get the first aid kit, and we start doing everything we can to plug all the wounds in his chest, arm, and hand. I'm not sure how long we did first aid for, but when we heard the firefighter show up to take over the first aid, the girlfriend was getting even more hysterical. The boyfriend was consoling her, telling her he'll be fine and he's barely hurt. No one would say anything about who did it, and we were about to start to properly investigate when the girlfriend blurted out, "Do you think I ended him?" We all just sort of stopped and stared at her, and my supervisor asked her to repeat what she just said. She started crying even louder and said she was upset with him and did it to him, but got carried away and didn't mean to end him. The boyfriend who was attacked and somehow stable was saying absolutely nothing and wouldn't tell us who did it. After we arrested her and we got her to the cells and him to a hospital, we figured out that he had forced her to get a termination a few weeks prior and that they had got super drunk that night and went to their separate homes. She was still obviously very upset and walked like 30 blocks back to his house and broke in and attacked him in his sleep. Story 11. I was in a small group investigating the house of a husband whose wife had been missing for 4 days. It was rare for this to happen in my town, so we were taking it very seriously. We were told to check everything, and we did multiple times. This dude had a large cellar. We made him join us down there 3 times. After another search of finding nothing, we thought we should check the cellar again. During the search, this guy seemed pretty calm and confident. He had his arms crossed almost proudly and just walked around nearby. We were about to leave, certain he wasn't involved. Then he opened his mouth, saying he was delighted to allay our suspicions, wished us health, and started talking about the foundation of his home, how it was well constructed, how the walls were solidly put together. And I'll never forget what happened next. He tapped his cane against the wall, and of all things, we hear the cry of a cat from inside his wall. Obviously, we were all shocked, and this guy staggered all the way back to the opposite wall in shock. We tore up the wall and found his wife. She had a large wound in her head, and a large one-eyed cat sat hissing on her shoulder. Pretty sure he ended up getting the penalty. If he had just stayed quiet, if he hadn't tapped his cane against that wall, he would have gotten away. He would be walking the streets as I type this. Story 12. Not a cop, but was on the other side of the conversation to get someone arrested. In college, I worked third shift at a gas station and usually dealt with a few crazy people, but nothing too bad. Even though where all the local cops knew me, one day this young guy comes in and tries to buy a toothbrush, gives me a clearly fake $20. If you're going to make fake money, at least cut the bill straight. I run the counterfeit pen over it, and sure enough, it's fake. Next is the conversation. Me. This bill is fake. I'm going to need real bills in order to sell this to you. Idiot. Well, my grandma gave me that bill. Can I have it back? Me. Sorry, it's against our policy for me to give fake money back. Idiot. Well, give it back to me or I'll call the police and tell them you won't give me back my property. Me. Too shocked to even say anything. Idiot. By the way, can I get some cigarettes? Me. You look under 30. I would need to see your ID. Idiot pulls out his wallet. I see another about 50 badly cut counterfeits in there as he hands me his ID. Me, getting over the shock of how stupid this guy is. Do you have real cash to pay for the cigarettes? Or do you really want the police called? Idiot. I'll wait for the police. So I called the non-emergency line of the dispatcher and explained the situation to her and gave her the name on his ID. While I'm still holding his ID and he's just standing there at 2 a.m, she looks him up in her system and says, he has a warrant for his arrest in the neighboring county for attempted robbery. I'm sending an officer to the store right away. Within 5 minutes of me calling, he was arrested and getting put in the car. The officer said he didn't test positive for anything, so still no clue why he asked me to call the police when he was the one trying to get fake money back. All right, I love how you're stealing his illegal property. That's a hilarious story, though. Gotta love it. Gotta love the idiot. Story 13. I'm not a police officer, but I know a criminal who was wanting to join a paramilitary group in Belfast. To join, he had to rob a Chinese takeaway to prove he had what it takes. Him and his accomplice got drunk before, so they had the Dutch courage to do the robbery. which was only a couple of hundred yards away from his house, and both of them were regulars in this takeaway. Anyway, they dressed in dark clothes and covered their faces with scarves and got their weapons for doing it. I'm not sure what they took. One of them held the door open while the other went in and demanded the money, which sounded simple enough. The lady at the checkout screamed and ran into the kitchen, and her husband ran out with a meat cleaver and jumped over the counter and chased the two idiots out and up a street that runs alongside the takeaway. They got away, or did they? They went back to their house and started drinking again, probably sizing their manhood up because they are so tough. In their drunken state, they thought of an amazing idea to get maybe compo from the takeaway. They went a few streets away to a phone box and called the police, saying they were walking home from a friend's house and got chased by a crazy Chinese man with a big knife. The police came to their house and listened to their story, and when they finished, the police said they were under arrest for armed robbery. They both got 18 months in jail. Northern Ireland's dumbest criminals. Story 14. We had just finished the roll call. I was standing out front, smoking a cigarette and joking around with the guys while we loaded up our cars. This obviously intoxicated guy comes stumbling up to us, cursing up a storm. "It was you effing guys arrested my friend," he barked as he tried to barge past us into the station house. We stopped him to inquire what in the hell he was talking about. "You guys locked up my friend. You were there." "Guy, my shift started 10 minutes ago. I haven't even finished my first cigarette of the tour yet." "BS, it was you effing guys." An equally intoxicated female comes stumbling up now, egging him on. "Yeah, it was you effing guys. You locked up our friend on Valentine earlier." "Guys, we don't even cover that block." And this went on for several minutes before we finally convinced them that it wasn't even our precinct. They stumble off across the street into a Jeep with a missing front end. The guy climbs into the driver's seat. I yell into the house for my partner and tell him what we've got. The entire midnight platoon jumps into our cars and goes after the drunk driving up the block. As we light him up, the car takes its time coming to a stop. Once it finally goes into the park, the entire vehicle begins shaking violently. Not really sure what in the hell is going on. I run up to the driver's side and swing the door open, and I couldn't believe the dumb crap unfolding before me. The girl was upside down in the driver's seat. The guy was between the driver and passenger seat, stuck. Another gentleman was fast asleep in the front passenger seat. It was obvious that the guy and the girl were trying to switch places but were too drunk to pull it off and got stuck. The two have the nerve to look up at me and say, "Oh, I was just taking off her shoe." Yeah, right. We pull them all out, cuff up the intoxicated driver and run the plate. It's stolen. These dumb mother lovers drove a stolen car to a police station looking for their friend. Back at the house, I ran the car on the computer and discovered it was stolen from a neighboring state. No big deal. I called them up to see about getting a copy of the report. Giving them the information, the first officer sounds a bit puzzled and puts me on hold. A lieutenant comes back on the line. "Hey, officer, so this car just got stolen this morning." "Okay." "From our impound lot." "Wait, what?" "Yep, apparently the guy who showed up at our command had been arrested in his friend's car a day or so before his run-in with us. When he got released, his friends picked him up and went to the impound to get the car. Much to their dismay, the lot was closed. Rather than return during business hour, these fine people scaled the fence, broke into the shed where the keys are kept, and then rammed the gate, hence the messed up front end. During their getaway, they rammed a trooper who saw what they'd done and some old lady's car who was just minding her business. They escaped across the bridge and state lines. They drop the owner of said vehicle off at home and go about day drinking. Apparently, the owner of the vehicle got into a fight with her boyfriend and wound up getting arrested. She calls up the geniuses who gets the bright idea to take the stolen car on a tour of the local precincts looking for their friend. Dumb mother. Story 15. Stopped a car for a traffic violation after it left a suspected dealer's house. Boyfriend was in the passenger seat and so he wasn't required to ID himself, but I asked if he had ID and he said no. He then gave me a name and date of birth. We had dispatch run the info he gave us. It came back clean, but the dude was so nervous his hand was shaking bad as he chatted with me. Dispatch was able to provide the physical description of the ID for the name he gave. It kind of matched, but the eye color was off. So we went to detain him for giving a false name to the police while we figured out who he was. As soon as we opened the door, he tried to jump into the back seat and the fight was on. He kicked me in the head a few times while trying to scramble for the back of the van. While trying to drag him out, he ended up pulling a knife, so we let him go and backed away from the vehicle while pulling out our firearms. He ends up holding the knife to his neck for a while and does the unexpected but not too deep. He then proceeds to do more damage to himself. Eventually, other cops show up and gets pepper sprayed and tased through the open sliding door of the minivan. That combo, plus the blood loss, and he kind of passes out. So we drag him out, cuff him, and start bandaging his wounds until the fire department shows up. They were quick since they had staged at the end of the road. He ends up living. I chat with his girlfriend while he's on the way to the hospital. Sounded like he'd rather die than go back to prison, and he thought he had warrants, but when we checked, he did not. If he'd just given his name, the worst that would have happened would be a ticket for rolling a stop sign for girlfriend. He ends up with getting like 40 staples and new charges for assault on police, possession for the huge baggie in his pocket, and a few other things. Girlfriend ends up with a ridiculous amount of red in the loaner minivan from the auto shop that was working on her car. So, dude probably wants to audition for the role of Joker. You know how I got my scars? It was because I wasn't thinking straight. Story 16. My dad wrote down since he likes to remember his stories for his years of not being a cop, so these are his words. I entered the, redacted for privacy, house sometime around after 11 p.m. The neighbors had reported a woman screaming and were worried about the wife who'd been seen as a little uncomfortable the last time she entered the house. Almost like she was hesitant or something. So I headed over and it was just like I expected. The husband is saying he didn't do anything and all is okay. The wife is uncomfortable and hardly speaking. And there's no one else to explain what I'm seeing, or so I thought, until a little kid, probably 6, comes running down from the hallway. At first, he's just excited to see a police officer, but his parents usher him to bed. He says his parents are lying, so I encourage them to stop pushing him away and let him talk. I had to pee really bad, he screamed loudly, upset. But Mommy and Daddy weren't in bed when I got up. They were watching something on the TV with a girl in it. So I said, were they talking about the girl? To see if maybe he was comparing her to the model or something. The kid shook his head and said, no, they weren't saying nothing. Then he ushered for me to come closer. By now, his parents were still looking at us in worry, so I figured maybe they didn't know how much the kid saw. I got on my knees and expected the kid to whisper, but he didn't change his volume at all. We have bedtime, and Mommy and Daddy weren't in bed. When I went up and told them they had to go to bed, since I had to go to bed, they got scared and Daddy screamed. I could tell now why everyone was so tense, but it was hard for me not to laugh. When I thanked the kid for telling me his story, he exited by letting me know he has to go pee now because I had to tell them it was bedtime, so I never peed. Before leaving the room and urinating with the door open down the hall, before I could say anything, the wife said they were watching a horror movie. I think she said Saw or something, but I don't remember. And there a kid appeared out of nowhere, scared the crap out of them both. The man backed up her statement and apologized for having wasted my time, but I assured them all was good. Even mentioned me at the age of 7 since they were sort of close in age and she'd done something similar to me. With a laugh, I left the house and reported back that all was good. We were going through his book of experiences recently and he said, I remember the husband denied screaming and I believed him until the kid said otherwise. I imagine he was embarrassed because I was asking the wife if she'd scream since it sounded feminine. I never would have known if that kid didn't say anything. Then again, I also would have thought that the man was hurting his wife, so I guess it is better that the kid said something. And it's one of my favorite stories of his. I asked him about why the wife was hesitant to enter the home, and she said her son thought he could stay up as long as it was just him and his dad in the house, since his dad tended to be more flexible. It was about to be the game he and his dad were working on together, so Mom waited outside for 5 minutes and let them finish the game. Really put the kid in a social mood, ready to talk since he did mention he'd just beaten the game with his dad. Story 17. Not a cop, but a teacher, and let's be honest, I gotta play authority often enough. I recently had an experience I just want to share. I teach in a school where it's 1-to-1, one teacher, one student. Yes, the families are quite wealthy, but they range from scraping $40,000 a year for one child's high school education to their kids throwing away $1,400 on sunglasses to get daddy's attention. No, I still don't get paid a great sum, but I have taught in traditional schools and I'm no longer considering side, which is nice. Anyway, the story. A student of mine was vaping in the boys' bathroom and a male teacher, I'm female, made a comment to me and another teacher about how often he does it, asking like, what do you do? Take it from him or get an admin involved, whatever. It's not a winning battle, admittedly. So you have to understand the student. He's got health problems, deadly allergy, asthma, some other stuff. I like this kid well enough to get a little mama bear about him. What the F is he doing vaping with asthma? He's got my class next. I confronted him. He's not admitting it, but he's not denying it either. I appreciate that and tell him so. From there, he admits it. His parents are okay with it. His doctor knows about it. It's the only thing that helps with his dopamine deficiency. All kinds of stuff that I'm barely believing, but all of which turns out to be true but irrelevant to the story. I'm just trying to be a decent authority figure, make sure he understands the dangers associated with it, that there's not as much research on the effects yet, it's not helpful to his body. It's certainly addictive, which he already understands firsthand. Why would you want to do something you know it's addictive, etc.? I try to be as open minded as possible. He's got good arguments. His dopamine deficiency is no joke. I'd never heard of nicotine helping with that, but I would be willing to learn. I admit to him that he's right when he says he's been way more social since he started. And when he tells me how long he's been doing it, I even laugh because holy crap, seriously, he had changed a lot. I had put it down as settling into his new school and getting comfortable with his peers. Point is, I'm trying to be as caring and open minded as possible, building trust, blah, blah, blah. Then he tells me, "Are you going to have to take it?" Ugh. Up to this point, I legit thought he was using another student's jewel. I was naive enough not to even consider it was his. I still just couldn't believe he was vaping at all, I guess. So now I know he's got it on him. I am legally obliged to take it or involve administration, school campus, yada, yada, yada. I tell him with a groan and a nervous laugh. Yeah. Cue immediate fit, cursing, hyperventilating, holding breath, refusing, pleading. Not exactly threatening me, but threatening to hurt himself because it's the only thing that allows him to feel happiness, the works. Long story short, we involve an admin. He calls his mom, cusses her out, calls his dad, doesn't cuss him out, but clearly wants to. Good job with boundaries, dad. And he gives it up and goes home for the rest of the day. The next time I see him, he actually apologizes to me for being an a-hole. His words, not mine. We talk, he understands some things, but I think mostly, don't let the teacher know that you have contraband in your possession, especially if she ain't asking. Story 18. Not sure about getting away with it, but here goes. I was working in the cell room one night. One of our responsibilities is to bring prisoners to a CCTV for their arraignment. An arraignment is where a person is informed of their charges and assigned bail. That's it. Not a court procedure to decide guilt or innocence. Not a time to explain their side, just a time to shut up, hear what you're being charged with, and find out what your bail is. Prior to taking the person in the courtroom, one of us will explain this in detail to the person. I'll usually say something like, "Don't say anything at all unless you need something," the judge said repeatedly. The judge will then say something similar. An attorney from the Defenders Association is there on the person's behalf and will also say something similar. I always joke that people have the right to remain silent, but not the ability. One particular case really stands out. I brought the man from his cell into the courtroom, gave him the usual spiel, and sent him in to see the judge. I was just outside the room and listened as the judge explained how things would go. I didn't read his paperwork because it's none of my business, and frankly, I don't care. Turns out he was being accused of arson and aggravated assault for allegedly lighting an ex-girlfriend's house on fire. This caused a few raised eyebrows between myself and the other officers in the cell room. The judge was in the process of assigning bail when the guy decided he just couldn't hold it in anymore. Him, "I got something to say." Judge, "This isn't the time for that, sir." Attorney, "Sir, anything you need to say, you can say to me afterwards in a confidential setting." Him, "No, I want to make a statement now." Judge, "Sir, this is all being recorded. It's not in your best interest to." Him, "I just want to say why I did it. She was a witch." Judge, "Sir, stop talking." Attorney, "I'm advising you to stop talking right now." Us in the cell room, "Shut up." Him finally stops confessing to the horrific crime he's accused of. By the way, he wasn't sorry. He actually asked me later if there wasn't something better we could be doing other than bothering him for nothing. Judge, "Sir, everyone here will likely have to be subpoenaed for your trial now." If the judge tells you to stop talking, you stop talking, am I not right? Dude just burned his only chance of bail and also made everyone else have to be there to testify against him too. Story 19. Not a cop, but offered to let one leave the scene of an accident, but he went by the book. Okay, so July 4th, 2006, I drove a taxi, wheelchair van at that. There was a group of young men that I'm dropping off at their vehicle. As they're getting out, there's a thump. Local officer backed into the van. Check, no problem with the passengers, they just wanted to get out of there. Check the damage, minor scrape on the rear bumper. I wanted to head back as it was my last call of the night. I'd already been told to drop the kids off and head into the garage. Tony, the officer, decides he's going to go by the book. Okay, he gets on his radio and calls his supervisor. I get on my radio and call my dispatcher. Cab 45, I'll be delayed coming into the office. I had a police car back into me. No damage, but officers going by the book. Long pause, standard reply. Do I need to call the police for you? No, Ruth, I think they've been contacted. It took over an hour for everything to clear up, but every cop that was on duty in the city just had the need to stop at that 7-Eleven to rib their cohort about it. I couldn't stop laughing because of the absurdity of the situation and kept apologizing to him. He's still on the force, got a commendation a few months later for saving a little girl's life, but he refused to take the easy way out. Story 20. Not a police officer, but a probation officer. I cannot tell you how many times I've had defendants readily admit to me that they are dirty, even though they tested negative on a screen. For clarity, my defendants are required by their terms and conditions of probation to submit to random screenings while on their term of probation in order to ensure compliance. For obvious reasons, you are not allowed to use while on probation. I'm a male, so when I administer a screen on a male defendant, I go in there with them to make sure they're not trying to use a urine device or to pass off someone else's urine as their own. Both are misdemeanors in my state, by the way. The tests we take are similar to a pregnancy test for scope. The defendants pee in a cup, the urine takes a little bit to process, the strip's built in, and presto, I know if you are dirty or not within 5 minutes or so. Now, all substances have different estimated times they stay in your system, and even then, a lot of factors can alter that timetable considerably. So it's possible to beat the test simply by being lucky. If I do suspect anyway, I can always send it off for confirmation at a lab, but generally we go by the screener test. Anywho, while waiting in the bathroom for the results, I've had dozens of defendants tell me, look, I know I'm going to be dirty. Can I just admit to it so as not to get into too much trouble? Some, just as the results on the screener come back negative, I tell them, sure, just sign this admittance form. Before people get angry, despite popular belief, we don't immediately throw people in jail. The reason it's in people's conditions of probation not to use is so when they do, we can offer therapy, rehab, etc. to help combat the problem. These problems are free to them, by the way. After all, if you're using, chances are you're making other life choices that can affect you negatively. If we can prevent you from being placed back on probation or going to prison by making you clean, then by God, we're going to do it. Story 21. Not me, but my boyfriend. BF's working overnight when a guy comes through town doing around 35 in a 25-mile-per-hour zone. BF pulls the guy over and asks for his documentation, license, registration, insurance. Guy flips open his glove box, snatches his documents out, and snaps the glove box closed super fast. BF laughs and says, "What do you have in there?" Guy gets a little sheepish and says, registration, insurance, whispers, little bit of grass, and whisper. BF, what? Guy coughs and says, registration, insurance, and a little bit of grass. BF laughs again and says, seriously? Can I see? Guy got a slap on the wrist for being honest and having a very small amount. Alright, if you liked any of those stories or learned a thing or two from them, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.